Thank you so much, Danny. I was able to hear you through the projector screen. Thank you so much for facilitating the Zoom social time before we started tonight. And welcome everybody who's here with us in the viewer auditorium. Very nice turnout this evening. Very happy about that. So, my name is Andy Nacarado. I think I know everybody here. I am the interim president for the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. And I will minimize those Zoom videos so we can see our full slides. Okay, well, I'm going to use the space bar. Sorry, everybody on Zoom, you can't see me anymore. But here's what's going on tonight. We have a few announcements before our feature presentation, which is Engaging Citizen Scientists with Budburst. And our speakers are going to be Zachary Snider and Dr. Bovard from Florida Gulf Coast University. We are, of course, the Naples chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. We are, in our logo, represented by one of Collier County's native water lily species, that is the tropical royal blue water lily. Has anybody here in the auditorium seen this water lily before? A couple of you. So for a lot of you, when you see this blooming, hopefully this summer, it can be in roadside ditches, believe it or not, or in actually preserved wetlands. That'll be a very exciting new bloom for you to see. Our mission with the Florida Native Plant Society to preserve, conserve, and restore native plants and native plant communities of Florida, and that guides us in everything that we do. We have a wonderful group of leaders for the Naples chapter. And for those of you in the auditorium, I'd like you to just wave to the group. I'm the interim president, of course. We have Maureen McFarland as our vice president. Hi, Maureen. Leslie Lambert is our secretary and plant sales chair. Beth Courtwright is our treasurer. Sarah Dust is our chapter representative. David Cordy is our conservation chair. Connie Daigle, membership chair. Karen Allman, programs and outreach chair. And Dee Cantor, outreach co-chair. Thank you everybody for being here tonight and everything that you're doing for the Naples chapter. A couple of things that are coming up this month. We have our members field trip. That's going to be Saturday, May 14th, 9 o'clock at Freedom Park. And Karen is going to start passing around our sign-up sheet for this field trip. We can have up to 15 people join on this field trip, and we have plenty of spaces left. So if you're able to join us, that's going to be next Saturday, May 14th, 9 o'clock at Freedom Park. And when you sign up on this form, you'll be emailed a link to complete our online field trip sign-up form. I know it sounds a little redundant, but it'll add you to the list of the others who have signed up online. So Freedom Park, who all has been there before? Oh, lots of you. Very good. Karen.
If you've been there before, I heard they were changing some of the water at the park, which I had not observed. So if you haven't seen it in a while, it may look different.
Yeah, so Karen is saying that if you haven't been to Freedom Park in a while, it may look a little bit different because they're changing, is it the created wetland side of the park, the water flow? We don't know a lot of details, but for the field trip, we're going to start on the west side, or I'm sorry, the east side of the park, where the preserved natural wetlands are that has the boardwalk area. And then hopefully, time permitting, we'll get to check out the created wetland side as well and see what's going on there. So that signed up sheet will keep going around, and if you're with us on Zoom, you can email us if you'd like to sign up for the field trip at naplesnativeplants@fnps.org, and you'll see that email address later on in these slides. Our field trip next Saturday is sort of a precursor to start getting us excited for the virtual conference with the Florida Native Plant Society. That is going to be Friday, May 20th through Sunday, May 22nd. Has anybody attended an FNPS conference before? Okay, a handful of you. So having it be a virtual conference is a great way to attend for the first time. Typically, they're held in a different place across the state each year. I know originally this conference 2 years ago was planned to be in Jacksonville, which would be a really long drive for us. So it's pretty nice that there's the virtual option, and it is virtual only this year. But there are expert speakers, game nights, plant ID contests, vendors, even through a virtual conference. And it's a $50 registration, but free for student members. So if you know any students who'd like to attend this Florida Native Plant Society conference, they can attend for free. And you can register online at fnps.org/conference. This is another way that you can support the Florida Native Plant Society. I think many of us have heard about the Florida Native license plate already. This one is still pre-production, so we're working on getting enough reservations for this license plate to reach 3,000 reservations before it will be produced or manufactured. Like any of the specialty license plates in Florida, the additional cost to the license plate is a donation that will go towards the Florida Native Plant Society. So I reserved one, paid the $34 like it says there, knowing that 25 of those dollars will go to the Florida Native Plant Society. So if you'll consider reserving a license plate as well, that'll help our group get up to that 3,000 minimum that we need to make this plate a reality. A couple of other recent developments with our chapter that are very exciting. Led by Connie Nagel several weekends ago now, there's a new native butterfly garden that was planted at Collier Seminole State Park, just outside of the blockhouse, which is their interpretive center. Were any of you part of that planting day? Yeah, a few of you were. I wasn't able to go on the planting day, but I was able to go a couple of weekends later, and all of the plants look really great. And a couple of things that are really special about this butterfly garden is all of the plants are native specifically to Collier Seminole State Park. So it's a super native butterfly garden. And the planting beds that you can see there, they're like big logs. They were cut and laid in a style that's similar to the blockhouse itself, which you can kind of see in the background of that picture. So it's really well thought out by the park staff, the park volunteers, and the Florida Native Plant Society, Naples chapter volunteers as well. So if you haven't been out to see it yet, I highly encourage you to go. It's just $5 per vehicle to enter Collier Seminole State Park, and they are open all day, 8 a.m. to sunset. This is another new volunteer opportunity. There is a native plant garden at the Collier County Extension Office. This is off of Immokalee Road near the Collier County Fairgrounds. It's also the location of the Naples Yard and Garden Show. I think many of you have been out to that event before. But there is a native plant garden on those grounds as well. And the Naples chapter has started a new partnership with the University of Florida IFAS Extension. And we're providing volunteers alongside the master gardeners to maintain this native plant garden. So if you are interested in assisting maintain this native garden, you can speak with Leslie Lander this evening. You want to raise your hand again, Leslie? Thank you. So it's a fun opportunity to be involved with another native garden that it's a demonstration garden for anybody in the community to be able to go see what it's like to landscape with native plants. Anything else I should add to that, Leslie?
Right now, for me, every week, either on Thursday or Friday, I try to send down a text message to anyone who's interested. Again, you can contact me or your number or mail information. Let me know what day it will be. We work anywhere from 1 to 4 hours, depending on what we want to do. A lot of different projects from, for example, or we're installing a pond as well. We're also learning some pruning techniques from Maureen. And yeah, it's really fun.
Thank you. So for those of you on Zoom, Leslie was saying that Thursdays and Fridays tend to be the work days, anything from 1 hour to 4 hours. And you can do what you like to do. That sounds good. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, this brings us to our iNaturalist update, and this fits in very well with the topic of tonight's feature presentation. As many of you know, back in October, the Naples chapter started an iNaturalist project. Raise your hand if you've used iNaturalist before. Good, a good number of you. So we started this project because we wanted to photographically document when native plants bloom, specifically in South Florida, because even if it's the same kind of plant, it doesn't necessarily bloom at the same time in North Florida as it does in South Florida. So we wanted to gather region-specific data that would help inform us to know when to expect different kinds of native plants to bloom and to track if there's any changes going on over time. So the name of our project is Naples Native Plants Bloom Phenology. This is the April update that was provided by Wade Gurley. He's a past board member of the Naples chapter. He moved out of state about a year or so ago, but he's still managing this project for us. We currently have 20 observers who have observed 612 native plant species. That's pretty impressive. Over 2,000 individual observations, so those can be repeats of the same species of plant. And the pictures you see on the screen, those were the plants most frequently observed in bloom. Last month in April, it was a 4-way tie, believe it or not. So from the top left there, going clockwise, that's the short leaf rose gentian. It's a really small white wildflower. Then it's the leavenwort's tick seed. Then below that is Pineland heliotrope. And then to the left of that is one of the purple thistles, but specifically that's Natal's thistle. And that's something I learned recently. There's not just purple thistle, there's also this Natal's thistle. So yeah, if you haven't yet joined iNaturalist or checked out our project online, just go to inaturalist.org to get started. And we'll be learning about another way to keep track of plants and phenology. And we'll be learning more about that shortly from our speakers. And just a reminder, we are seeking our next chapter president. Many of you know that I've been serving as interim president so far this year, and it looks like I'll be moving out of the area pretty soon. So if you yourself or you have somebody in mind who you think would like to lead a small nonprofit organization with the mission of preserving, conserving, and restoring native plants in Southwest Florida. Somebody who really has a passion for native plants and our environment. Just let any of the Naples chapter leaders know, or you can send us an email anytime. Phoebe.
Could a pair of people volunteer?
That's a good question. Phoebe asked if a pair of people could volunteer, and that is a possibility. I know there's at least one other chapter that has co-presidents.
I think Women Voters does,
And you're saying another organization does that too.
because people don't want to be committed for every single month.
That is a possibility to have co-presidents. Very good question. But again, if you think of anybody or you just want to talk to us about it in general, talk to one of us tonight, or if you're on Zoom, email naplesnativeplants@fps.org. Okay, we're almost done with the announcements. These are our upcoming events. We already talked about the two that are coming up this month, our field trip to Freedom Park and the FGCU virtual conference. And then mark your calendars for Wednesday, June 1st. That's going to be our next chapter meeting. We are planning on it being hybrid still, so here in this room as well as on Zoom. So joining at 6 o'clock for the social time, 6:30 meeting gets started. And the topic next month is a really good one, connecting children with plants. And that will be presented by Caitlin Dillard. She's part of the education staff here at Naples Botanical Garden. So make sure you mark your calendars for our next meeting. And this is, again, our website. If you're not already getting our e-newsletter, there is a place on our website to sign up. I'd like to recognize our business members as well. You know, we have representatives from Cypress Cove Landkeepers here tonight, Landry Landscape Design, Naples Botanical Garden, and Wyatt Collier. So thank you all for being here. Okay, this is going to be my last slide. So we are now transitioning to our feature presentation, and I'll turn it over to Karen to introduce our guest speakers. Turn it over the headset. I'll turn it off.
I'll get the clicker to work.
Okay, sorry. So this evening we have two presenters. Zachary Snider is a graduate senior in the Environmental Studies program at Florida Gulf Coast University. He has developed a keen interest in climate change and how it impacts our planet both now and into the future. Zach has interest in plant life and weather phenomena and hopes to combine youth interest in his career after graduating from FGCU in May. So now. Dr. Bovard is a faculty member at the Water School's Ecology and Environmental Studies Department at Florida Gulf Coast University. He received his BA in biology from West Virginia University, his PhD at Duke University in botany, and was focused on plant physiological ecology. Prior to arriving at FGCU, he worked with a number of institutions, including the Ecosystem Center at the Marine Biological Laboratory in Woodsville, Massachusetts, the Ohio State University, University of Michigan, Indiana University, and Florida International University. His research has focused on the responses of forest ecosystems to predicted changes in atmospheric CO2 and climate, and the role of forest ecosystems play in both carbon storage and hydrologic processes, especially when impacted by human activities. His recent research projects relate to mangrove carbon storage, use of native species on rooftop gardens, which, if you remember he gave that presentation to our chapter, I think about 2 years ago. Plant conservation. So please join me in welcoming Zach and Brian.
If I can figure out how to use this. I hate microphones. Is that too loud? Okay, we good? Before I get started this evening, and actually I'll go back one slide. Maybe we'll go back. We're gonna have to do this the old-fashioned way, and or not. We can't do anything. Let's see if that does it. There we go. And so then, you'd think that after 2 years of this, that we'd have this down pat in our sleep. If you got here a little bit late, or you came in early, and this thing is not going to cooperate with me, we're going to be teaching you how to use a different app for phenologic observations, and it's called the Budburst app. And it didn't used to be an app. This is a longer running phenologic database that is run out of the Chicago Botanic Garden. And it's part of the National Ecological Observatory Network, which is something that the National Science Foundation put together somewhere around the year 2000. And they solicited different grant proposal requests for funding to develop ecological monitoring networks. And this is one that came out of the Chicago Botanic Garden that we're going to be taking advantage of tonight. I started using this in my climate change ecology class back around 2015 after spending some time at the Chicago Botanic Garden with their staff and learning about some of the programs that they were doing there in terms of citizen science. If you haven't downloaded the app and you want to participate tonight, you can pull out your smartphone, and if you turn your camera on and focus on this QR code, a link should pop up that will take you to the Budburst site, and you can set up an account with them. And then maybe while Zach is talking, I can wander around and we can try to get you added to our FGCU group. If you decide later you want to join our group on this app and you don't have enough apps already on your phone, you can send me an email at this address, or you can link to that bottom QR code, which will give you my email address as well. I'm going to try and move this out of the way. So this is the roadmap for the talk. This is the first time I've ever actually given a presentation with one of my undergraduate students. I've given presentations with other faculty members and colleagues here at the garden. So this is the first. Zach is graduating on Saturday. So we thought we would give you a brief introduction to phenology, but it turns out you already know everything there is to know about phenology apparently. So maybe we're wasting your time with the first 15 minutes of this presentation. I don't know. Then I'll turn the mic over to Zach, and he'll chat about climate change responses and what the impacts can be of climate changes or impacts on phenologic responses. We'll briefly introduce citizen science, which again, you already know about. And then we've got a little activity plan for you with the Budburst Act. And then we'll end with a brief survey about your experience and answer any questions that you might have. So I don't know what you know about phenology, but it seems like you're smarter than the average bear. Charles Morin was the first person to coin the term phenology, and he did so in 1849 in a lecture that he gave in Belgium. He was the science director of the botanical garden in Liège, Belgium. And he was involved in this lengthy scientific debate with another colleague of his over about a decade period. And they really kind of delineated what phenologic science was going to become. In 1853, he wrote the first paper where this was widely recognized as a term. And he did that as a result of a very strange winter that occurred in 1852 and 1853. And he made phenologic observations that he presented in that paper. And the title of that paper is kind of a cool one. It was Phenological Memories of the Winter of 1852 and 53. And I thought that that was sort of a clever title for a paper from the 1800s. So what does phenology mean? Phenology, by definition, is the study of the timing of organismal shifts from one phase in their life to another. And if you go back to the Greek, it's based on the two words phenos, or pheno, to show or appear, and theology comes from logos, to study. So literally, phenology is the scientific study of the appearance of organisms over time. We're all familiar with phenologic events. Bears hibernate in the winter, they come out and eat lots of food in the summer, fatten up, and then they go hibernate again. That is a phenologic process. The diagram here on the top of this slide is the phenology of an apple tree in cartoon format. In the spring, the trees push their leaves out, they expand, it begins flowering by entering the flowering phase. In this stage here, you're in sort of the peak blooming stage like the shirt that I'm wearing tonight. And then ultimately, the tree is going to produce apples in the fruiting phase. And then as you move into the fall period, the leaf loses the chlorophyll in its chloroplast and begins the senescence process and eventually loses all of its leaves at the leaf fall event. Phenology is one of the oldest branches of environmental science when we think about what we've used phenology to do. It dates back, some of the earliest recordings of phenologic records go back to the 21st century BC to the Chinese, who were actually recording phenology events as part of their agricultural practices. And they actually developed agricultural calendars that they used so that they knew when to plant certain types of plants. The Japanese have recorded cherry blossoms for over 1,200 years. And every year they have a cherry blossom festival that you and I probably learned about when we were all in school. The timing of that festival changes every year because of phenology. It's not on the same day every year. And it is adjusted to be timed with the peak bloom event that occurs within those cherry trees. The Romans used this in their harvesting of grapes. And many societies can link to phenologic events. You and I probably were taught this particular phrase when we were in grade school. April showers bring May flowers. Phenology. This is one you probably haven't heard. When maples are beginning to unfurl their leaves, plant perennials. There are lots of examples of these types of sayings in many different cultures. And it just sort of speaks to the integral nature of phenologic events in human society and who we are as a species. long-term phenological records, they go back to the Chinese, and up until probably about the middle of the 1900s, were largely a result of sort of more agrarian types of relationships with phenologic events. Basically, from the time of Morin to the 1970s, the development of phenology as a science really began to take shape. And people began to recognize it as a very important form of science. And starting in the mid-1900s, people began really looking at what are the controls on phenologic phenomena and how can we better predict that. In the 1990s, climate change had basically become widely recognized as something that was actually occurring. That may not have occurred in sort of mainstream American society, but scientists widely understood that the planet's climate system was changing and that the biological communities on the planet were responding to those changes in the atmosphere and in the climate patterns that were occurring on the planet. And so as a result, people began linking the value between phenologic observations and our understanding of how the planet was going to respond to impending climate change that we are experiencing and will continue to experience moving forward. So why is phenology important, especially with respect to ecological systems in the biosphere? This is an example of the pied flycatcher that is a bird species in Europe and Africa that Zach is going to talk about in a little bit more detail here in a bit. Many organisms have very stringent requirements in their life cycles, and they're highly dependent upon energy resources and the availability of those resources. And so they time their phenologic events across a season or a year or their lifespan with particular cues in the environment. This bird migrates to where it nests and is highly reliant upon caterpillars, and those caterpillars are highly reliant on the vegetative community that's present in Europe. If this series of events shift and one or two of these species either responds or doesn't respond, it can mess up the entire chain of events related to that food web dynamic. And it can have very serious implications for the survival of particular species, such as this one. Allergies. I have terrible pollen allergies. I don't know about you. And it's like clockwork every year. It's a phenologic response. I know that come the end of February, I'm going to begin having a runny nose, I'm sneezing, I'm coughing, my eyes get itchy, they eventually will swell shut if I don't do anything about it. If that flowering season shifts, that alters that time period when we're experiencing those things. And that can have economic implications. It can have health implications. I use this Flonase over-the-counter drug to counteract my allergies. And I've shared this story with Zach, and I thought it was a good one to relate to you so that you can see how phenology actually impacts our lives. Flonase, they sell it at Costco. If you go to Costco in September, you'll have a hard time finding this, and if you can, you'll pay a pretty steep price for it. It tends to show up about January, February, right before the allergy season kicks in, at the period when most of us are experiencing pollen allergies. Now, if you go there or you went there last week, and this happens every year because I've checked it, wait till the end of April, after the pollen has blown away, the price drops by about 30%. And you can load up in April. Phenology, it influences our economy. It influences our health, influences a lot of things. And there are ways in which we're not really paying attention all the time. And because I do what I do and I give presentations like this, I'm always thinking about connections like that I'm seeing. Phenology is also important to farmers and landscapers, people like you and I that like planting plants in our gardens. Farmers and gardeners, we need to know, when's the last frost going to occur? When's the wet season begin? When does the dry season end? It influences how we plant plants, how we tend to those plants. Farmers need to know, when can I plant my plants in the ground? When is the best time to actually fertilize and to maximize my productivity on my farm? The Farmer's Almanac, publication that dates back to the 1700s, still being published. You can drive up to the Publix on the corner here, pick up a copy. Inside it, you'll find long-term weather projections that are in there. You'll also find a planting calendar, phenology. So lots of natural processes are tightly linked to phenology. Phenology is also important to the ecology of the biosphere because it impacts both the living and non-living components of ecosystems. It influences the abundance of organisms. It influences the diversity of organisms that occur at a particular location at a particular time. It influences ecosystem services that you and I benefit from. It influences the way that food webs organize themselves and the dynamics that take place and the interactions that occur within them. It also influences things that you may not have thought about before, like the global cycles of water and carbon. And I'm going to talk about that very briefly before turning the reins over to Zach. If you look at this diagram, if we have changes in climate and weather that are at the top of this diagram, it heavily influences phenology patterns across the globe. This is a universal thing that happens. Climate and weather are tightly linked to phenology, things like bud rate, leaf senescence. Phenology then responds to that and has feedback back on different ecosystem processes. One of those is the hydrologic cycle. If plants don't have leaves, they're not moving water from the soil to the atmosphere. When they do that, that influences weather patterns. There's a feedback effect. So if you lengthen the growing season, you lengthen the amount of time that plants are actually pumping water to the atmosphere, and then there are consequences to that. The same can be said with the carbon cycle. The longer the growing season, the longer the time period for the plants to take CO2 out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, pack it away into the ecosystem long term. And we can see that. These are data that historically have been referred to as healing curve data because Dave Keeling started collecting the first set of these data on Mauna Loa back in 1958. And that's been continuously collecting data. And since then, scientists have added sites all around the world so that we can actually look at how is that changing from the equator to the poles? How is it changing over time? And one of the things that we can see is, you look at this diagram, it starts in 1993 along this axis here, goes to 2004. The equator is right in the middle here of this graph. The North Pole is here, the South Pole is down here. As you move to the poles, the influence of the terrestrial system in the Northern Hemisphere has a bigger impact on the swings in the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. As you move to the South Pole, where we have less land mass, there's less of an influence of those plants that are there. As you go through time, what we're seeing is the growing season is lengthening, and plants are taking more and more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere every single year. And it's not by a small amount. We're talking about like thousands of tons of carbon. So these are huge shifts, and it's one way that ecosystems are beginning to respond to climate change.
So this is this is the part where we talk about how climate change is being affected by, or how climate change is influencing phenology. Some of the most fragile and most changed phenological timings are the bird and the flowering times across the world. And this is in coming process, and like fall events are happening later, and spring events are happening earlier. The spring events, like flowering, are happening earlier in the year, and fall events, like the leaf fall, are happening later in the events. This is this paper here talked about an experiment that was done in the Himalayas, and it has a lot of different field records, and people were doing experiments and taking photographs at specific times across like large periods of time, and you can see that there was some sort of evidence that phenology was being affected by climate change and causing these plants to flower and do different things at different times than they were previously known to in that area. So not all species and regions are changing at the same rate, which leads to these mismatches in timing. So we're back here to the pie fly picture example, where the bird starts in Africa in the winter and it goes to Europe in the spring. And it goes to Europe in the spring to nest and lay eggs. So that way, when the eggs hatch, the eggs are hatching at peak insect biomass. So that way that the young has enough food to advance on to an adult and complete the cycle. However, if they're flying, if they don't change their migration pattern in time with the changing insect biomass, they're going to end up laying their eggs at a time where the young are hatching, but there's not enough insects to feed all of them. And this is going to have like huge impacts on their total population and their success rate and how many they can pass the young stage into an adult so that they can continue this cycle and continue their whole species. So the fact that different areas are being changed differently, usually the colder areas are the ones that are more affected by climate change, and therefore will probably end up changing more from the phenology of the area will end up changing more. So that's why like this is a very important kind of thing, because it affects a lot of species in different areas, especially those in the colder periods. So here is how I figured out about this Budburst program with Dr. Bryant. I was in this climate change ecology course last fall, the last fall semester, and like he said, he's been doing this kind of Budburst thing with his classes for a while, and it really interested me because when we did it, it was like one of the first times that we started using like the newer versions of the app on the phone. And when we went through, we noticed that there was a lot of data lacking from Southwest Florida, because Budburst is owned by is usually run by the Chicago Botanic Gardens. They have a lot of data from more temperate areas up in the northern United States. They don't have a lot of data down here in Florida, which was something that we were running into with species identification, because we would take pictures of things that are native down here, but we weren't getting exactly accurate species identification, so they were lacking in their database. So I decided to partner up with them with our internship with, FGCU here at the Botanic Garden. We were taking pictures and doing activities, as well as the Chicago Botanic Gardens. I got in contact with them and talk about some stuff with their app, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But I think that was just kind of my story about how I ended up finding this opportunity with Brian and why this is kind of like an important thing. So this is, they didn't get passed out, but there are brochures and flyers up here. This is kind of like the front page of the flyer that we put together that has some information that was on the earlier slides, talking about like phenology and what it is, as well as having some links and QR codes to our Budburst group. And on the second page of that flyer, it has pictures of species that we were looking at on campus and here at the Naples Botanic Garden. It has some, as you can see up there, it has some native species as well as some invasive, because we wanted to get a good look at like the different things that were here on campus and or on campus back down there and here in Naples. And also these pictures were good for people who weren't necessarily professionals at identifying species out in the wild. So they could kind of have these pictures and look at the different types of phases that plants are in, because, there we go. So as you can see here, it has like a picture of the whole plant, leaves. This is the fruits, this is the flowers. It has that kind of picture for each species that we were looking at down there. And this is important because it kind of ties in with the whole Budburst thing about taking pictures of these plants and identifying them at different parts of their flowering and their fruiting stages. So that way we can get a whole comprehensive data of what the plant looks like at the beginning and the end of their cycles, and then what each stage is as well. So why Budburst over any of the many different kinds of apps that do this. So Budburst is very easy to use, not very easy to use, and once you learn that they can do a whole bunch of different species identifications really, really fast, because the individual observations, they take just a couple minutes, once you get proficient at it, just like a couple minutes, 1 or 2, to get through them and label all their kind of different phases that they're in. It has the phenology reporting tools built into the observation, so once you take the picture, you go to the next step, it'll start that phenological observation, and you just have to click a couple buttons and we'll go through. And we'll go through all of the specifics of that in the upcoming year with our activity that we're going to do. It has plant identification built into the app. I believe it actually does use iNaturalist's like plant observations thing. So if you don't necessarily know the species that you're looking at, but you still want to make an observation, iNaturalist will help you give you some suggestions about what kind of plant species that you might be looking at. It monitors the specific species over time very easily. So every time you take a picture, it'll take the time and the date of where you took it as well as your location. So you can go back to that location and do it later. So you have location, time, and date. So if you take a picture in January and then you want to look back at it in February, you can see that you took that picture on January 12th. So you can take a picture of the plant in January, March, April, May, and then also in like November and at the end. So you can get a whole timeline of the one plant species. So you can get it in January when it's just beginning to start to leave. You can get it in November when the leaves fall off. You can get all the stages between when it started fruiting and flowering and all this other cool data that you can get from observing just one species over a long period of time. As I mentioned earlier, this project was involved with the NEON, the National Ecological Observation Network. The data that you collect in this app can be used by scientists in the research papers and has been in the past as well. This data is very important to the scientists that are interested in phenology and are looking at that in connection to climate change. And as well as some learning curves that we've had with this app. I've been in contact, as I said earlier, I've been in contact with Chicago Botanic Gardens, talking to them about their app and how some things we can improve on it, because something that's very important with this app is making sure that you get the species right. It's kind of hard to go back in and edit it. If you get the species wrong, you have to contact them and then get them edited. You can't necessarily edit it if you're like the leader of the group. So we've been, part of this reason we've been using Budburst is so that way we can go and use it and then give them feedback and try to improve it and make it a better science collecting tool. So this is just some details about the Budburst activity that we're going to do. Make sure you have the app on your phone and that you're in the group. It's pretty important that you are in the group. Observations that are not in the group are very hard to go back and find for like people outside of the group. So that's just like the very main important step is that when you make the observation, make sure that you're in the group. Everybody who's used this app in the past has had some trouble with that, making sure that you're in the group to be included, and also by many stories of taking observations and then, oh, we're not in the group, so we have to go back and do them again to make sure that other people can see them because they just kind of show up on your own page.
I'm the biggest smile I ever got to win.
Yeah. Yeah, we were out doing this, I believe it was yesterday, and we were like monitoring species, and he's like, oh man, I'm not in the group yet, so. And also ensure appropriate species identification. As I said earlier, it can be hard to go back in and change the species if you do something wrong. So when we go out and do the activity, I do recommend that you pick species that you're familiar with, so that way you can make sure that it's right. And if you need help, you can use, obviously, an app as iNaturalist things, and then you can go double check with somebody else who you might know the species as well. So here is an actual picture or like a step-by-step example of what it looks like in app to actually do it. So first, make sure that you're in the group, first step, and then you'll be able to add observation from in the group. So you want to click that, and then take a picture of your plant, identify it with the iNaturalist to make sure that it's correct. And then once you select the correct species, you'll go to the next option, and you'll be able to record the data here. This is blown up. This is kind of like the same options for these as well, but these are just a little bit harder to use. Make sure to blow these up and make them easier to see. So it'll ask you questions about whether or not the plant has no flowers, is in early flowers or late flowering. And you can also add a picture specifically, like if there are flowers on the plant, you can take a zoomed in picture of the flowers on the plant as like extra data for the observation. That's just an optional step. But it is kind of something cool that you can do that on each step as well. You can add a picture of, if the plant is flowering and fruiting at the same time, you can add a picture of both within that observation. So it'll ask you a picture of the flowers, the fruits, and then it'll ask you questions about leaf color and unfurling, whether or not the leaves are completely unfurled or not, or if they're more towards the autumn, it'll ask you like if leaves are starting to fall off the plant as well. So just a little bit of a recap for the Budburst activity here. You definitely want to make sure that when you get into the app, you select this groups option because it'll lead you to your page with all the groups that you're in. And then you want to select the FGCU climate change ecology here. And then right here, you'll see this add observation button. And then it'll take you from that to your camera and just take a picture of the plant. We have some plants over here on our site table that we're going to pass out so that you guys can do a little practice using the app with some of the species that weren't like close here. We kind of went around the garden a little bit before our presentation, picked up some plant species that were around the garden that I did in Florida. So if you guys would like and have the app all ready and set up, you can come here and take a few pictures as we pass out these plant species.
So if you don't have the app already, you can go to budburst.org to that page and you can get that installed and set up an account on your phone. We brought these in so that you can experiment and hear with things and get a little bit of experience with stuff that you probably know. I don't think that there are any really kind of exotic native plants that we brought in here. And if you don't know what it is, we can help you.
Yes. I only know one of all of them.
Bet you know more.
Uh-uh.
Oh, I guarantee you've seen this. Really?
But I didn't.
Up in Chicago.
You want to go to the groups button down the bottom?
And if you haven't joined our group, you can come up here and I can have you enter your email addresses on this computer.